So Candace Owens has a new show. I forget which outlet it's on. One of the daily outlets, Daily Wire, Daily Caller, one of those. One of the horrible right-wing rags. She is a pompous blowhard who doesn't know anything but talks with an extreme amount of confidence, so dupes people into believing her, or just makes it so that right-wingers can have confirmation bias and feel like they're getting a level of certitude for their prior held beliefs that is unmerited. So she goes out on her show and makes an argument here about Australia that is absurd. So I will say that the media is misleading people on this. There are a bunch of headlines about how Candace Owens calls to invade Australia. That's actually not true. I watched the whole segment, and she clearly says, she literally says, I'm saying that in jest. Like, of course I don't want to invade Australia. But she's making the point that we talked about freedom and democracy in going into Afghanistan. Well, what about the freedom and democracy to go into Australia? Because in her opinion, they're massively restricting freedom and democracy. So she doesn't actually want to invade Australia. But what's amazing is people are burying the lead because there was a equally ridiculous, if not more ridiculous statement she actually made in the same segment. Take a look.
For the last 20 years, the United States has spent trillions of dollars overseas in Afghanistan fighting a war, which we lost, by the way. We were told that the war was necessary anyway. It was necessary, the slaughtering of American sons and daughters on foreign soil, because we were fighting a noble cause to spread democracy in a tyrannical land, to free an oppressed people. So I'm going to ask those same lecturing politicians and media members a question now. When do we deploy troops to Australia? When do we invade Australia and free an oppressed people who are suffering under a totalitarian regime? When do we spend trillions of dollars to spread democracy in Australia? Australia currently, make no mistake, is a tyrannical police state. Its citizens are quite literally being imprisoned against their will. So when do we deploy? Of course, I ask that in jest because we all know the real answer. What is happening in Australia under the guise of a virus, which, by the way, as of August 7, 2021, experts estimate the overall recovery rate is between 97% and 99.75%. What's actually happening under the guise of this virus is federal overreach, tyranny, totalitarianism, the kind that gives birth to evil dictatorships and human atrocities. We are watching a replay of the early ambitions of Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez. That is what is hiding beneath the guise of this fictitious, perpetual need to slow the spread. We all know some more truths, that what's happening in Australia was meant to happen here in America, that this current totalitarian administration is fighting tooth and nail to trample state rights and federalize America. And if it were not for Republican governors standing in the way, we would be similarly stripped right now of our most basic of individual freedoms.
See, those last 2 points are the points that everybody's overlooking, but that's actually the absurd part. So she was clearly not advocating we invade Australia. But what she is saying is what's going on in Australia, their response to COVID, makes them like, and I quote, Hitler, Stalin, Fidel Castro, and Hugo Chavez. Now, just put aside the absurdity that she's so uneducated on this topic and she's such a propagandist that she doesn't understand that there is a grand canyon of a difference between all of those figures. Stalin, Hitler, Fidel Castro, and Hugo Chavez. You're putting Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, whatever you think of them, you're putting them in the same category as Stalin and Hitler? Why not tattoo on your forehead, I'm a fucking ignorant dumbass? You should do that, because clearly you know nothing about probably any of them. Then she goes on to say, and the reality is, this is what this administration wants to do here. Okay, so let me give you just some basic facts about what's going on in Australia. Now, Australia has been, it's true, they've been very aggressive with cracking down on COVID. So they do have a much more top-down response than the United States. They do have a much more, I think it's fair to call it authoritarian response compared to the United States. For one thing, they have these snap lockdowns whenever there's any cases. And Now, listen, as I have my own biases coming into this conversation, as an American, I can only shake my my commitment to individualism so much. I am a Yankee tried and true at heart, so when I look back on how we handled COVID from the beginning, we mismanaged it in 1,000 different ways, but lockdowns are not my cup of tea. I think that we should have basically copied the Japanese approach, which is like universal masking, and I think, the vaccine obviously should have been pushed aggressively, and I like the idea of you could either get the vaccine or get tested all the time. I love that idea. I think that that's the best way to approach this. Now, it is true. Australia goes further than that. They have these snap lockdowns. But having said that, I wouldn't want to be in Australia over the United States. But you also can't deny the effects of what they've done. So the downside is, yes, there are some more restrictions on freedom. But the upside is, I believe their total number of dead in the entire pandemic is about 1,500 people. In fact, let me fact check this live on air as I'm talking to you. I'll give you the exact number. So we have a grand total of 1,448 deaths in all of Australia during this pandemic. Now compare that to the United States. Let's take a look. United States deaths from COVID. 736,000. Now, even if because obviously just looking at the raw numbers is not sufficient. You'd have to do it per capita to see the reality. But even if you look at it per capita, we are a gigantic mess. I mean, nearly 1 million people have died, and they're faring relatively well in terms of the number of deaths from COVID. So, now she doesn't give you any of those facts. She doesn't give you any of that information because what she wants to do is paint a biased picture and push her narrative. She doesn't want to say, well, look, here are the downsides, but, I mean, I can't bury the lead here. The upside would be people aren't dying in nearly as high numbers. But she doesn't tell you that important piece of context because she's a propagandist. Now, again, I have my own bias coming into this conversation. I do have a bias towards individualism to some extent. I do have a bias towards freedom to some extent, which is why, looking back on it, I don't like the idea of the lockdowns. I would have just done universal masking policy instead. But she would have called universal masking authoritarian as well. She would have called any basic regulations to try to stop a global pandemic, she would have called it authoritarian, and she would have done exactly what she did, which is say, this administration, meaning Biden, is like Stalin, Hitler, Fidel Castro, and Hugo Chavez. So Australia is like Hitler, and Biden is like Hitler. And by the way, to pretend like there's no difference between what Australia's doing and what the US is doing is just a lie. There's no way around that. It's not like, oops, she just forgot the nuance of it. No, because what's Biden's approach? Well, I don't know. Why don't we look at what he did for his approach? Have there been lockdowns? No. Biden didn't lock down the economy. In fact, Biden has taken the opposite position, and he said it strongly, that we're not going to lock down again. Okay, so why are you lying? As if Biden is the same as Australia when Australia likes to go into these snap lockdowns whenever there's cases. Candace, that's just a lie, and you know that's a lie. So there's the way they've approached it is not even close to the same. And there are some people who would argue, well, they like the Australian way better. Now, again, me personally, I don't. I like the Biden way better. The other part of Biden's policy is what? She would say, an authoritarian vaccine mandate that Joe Biden is doing. It's not an authoritarian mandate if you have an option of either get the vaccine or get tested. And that's what Biden did. And he only did it for businesses with 100 employees or more. So just an outright war on nuance and complexity and detail. And she's being hyperbolic because she's a hack. And again, to make the case, Hitler, Australia is like Hitler, Biden is like Hitler. I mean, do we even need to get into the details? You guys all know this. You guys, the overwhelming majority of you who watch this show are educated on topics like this. You care about history. You care about politics. Millions and millions, 6 million people that died as a result of Hitler. Concentration camps, gas chambers, starving people to death, literally trying to take over the world and actually succeeding to a large degree in taking over vast swaths of Europe, almost all of Europe. And you're going to compare lockdowns from a virus to active genocide. And you're going to compare Joe Biden, whose approach has been no lockdowns, vaccinate or test. That's like Adolf Hitler. He wants to do that, but it's big, brave Republican governors are stopping him. Nobody should take her seriously. Nobody. And my message to the media is this. You don't need to lie or mislead people when she says the ridiculous thing 2 seconds after the thing you made the headline. So the original article in The Guardian said something to the effect of, Candace Owens wants to invade Australia, or Candace Owens asked when we're going to invade Australia to bring them like freedom and democracy. But clearly you saw the clip. Now, I'm second to none in my hatred of Candace Owens, but clearly she said, I'm asking this in jest. So I don't know why you make that the headline when the ridiculous thing she said is right after that. Oh, Australia and this administration are like Stalin, Hitler, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez. Absolutely absurd. And the other thing is, that it's just rank partisanship with her too. So, you want to talk about authoritarian crackdowns. What do you think Guantanamo Bay is? What do you think Edward Snowden revealed, what happened under the Bush administration and under the Obama administration, where we have NSA spying and collection of metadata on all Americans? You have no protection from unreasonable search and seizure anymore. That's pretty authoritarian. The drug war in this country, which locks up people for non-violent so-called crimes, we jail more people than any other nation on earth, and that's authoritarian. But it's like there's never a substantive criticism, and it never applies to the right. It's always just through a partisan lens, and always against the left, and always hyperbolic. I got a zillion problems with Biden. His COVID strategy being like Hitler is not one of them, because I have a functioning brain, and I don't have a cinder block where my head is. So, Jesus Christ, man. By the way, she also just does, I don't know if you caught it there, but there's a couple little hints she drops there that she's doing outright COVID denialism. She says, this fictitious need to slow the spread. Fictitious need to slow the spread? Look, it's one thing to argue I think their stuff goes too far. And on that I might agree. It's another thing to say it's a fictitious need to slow the spread. Fictitious need to slow the spread? There's nothing fictitious about wanting to stop the spread of a deadly virus. Now, by the way, she goes on to say, like, the recovery rate from this is like 99.75% or something to that effect. And what a dumb way of talking about this pandemic, because that gives a misleading picture. Yeah, and we have what? Again, 736,000 deaths in the United States. It's the biggest mass death event in United States history, and you're downplaying it. And I forget who said it. It might have been one of the founding fathers. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's a great example of, giving a statistics that's colossally misleading. And, this is Candace Owens' job. So don't fall, like, her smug condescension, how she always talks like she's, I'm super certain of herself and super arrogant and super on top of it. There's no way you could look at that unless you're already colossally brainwashed and say anything other than she's lying, she's being misleading, she's being hyperbolic because she's a partisan hack. So there you have it. And again, to the media, there's no reason to overreach when she says ridiculous things in the segment that you're taking something out of context from. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.